From the ages of 12 to 15, my brother and I lived with his mom in this really run-down ghost town. There literally was only one gas station in the whole town, and that was the only store here. We lived in a small trailer, and 90% of the population of this town, which was less than 100 people, lived in this park. It was a white hillbilly trash, as white hillbilly trash can get. We were so poor and never had anything to do, so unfortunately we experimented with drugs that we could get from our older crackhead neighbor. His name was Wes. He seemed like a nice guy, but he was not a good person, really. He was a 55-year-old man, and why was he so obsessed with giving 13-year-olds drugs? Very shady. I realized how weird he was as we got older. Most of the time he just gave us weed, but we would also drink from time to time, or even a few times we did LSD, and there was a time for like a month straight we did pills and cocaine almost every day. I wish I never did that shit growing up, but this is me, the unfortunate and unfiltered truth. I thought it would be worth mentioning I'm not a degenerate person anymore. I'm a 25-year-old guy and I'm a licensed therapist in St. Louis. I've made something of my life, but this story took place long ago. Back to a time when I was heading nowhere to be another statistic. My brother isn't blood related, but we've called each other that our whole life, so before you get confused, his mom isn't my mom. His name was Caden. Caden's mom was more of a druggie than us, and we never had food in the house. We literally lived off of ramen noodles and leftover pizza. She made her money by selling herself and was hardly ever home. When she was home, she was either too fucked up to care or always had strange men in the house. One night when we were all alone, we decided to go for a walk. Sometimes we would bring a backpack with a bunch of water and snacks, when we could, and just walk and talk for miles upon miles. Anything to not be present in that house. We did this often, and most of the time we never had any issues. Cars rarely drove past us at all. This town maybe had 100 people, like I said, and I bet only 40 of which had a car. Most of them were half dead and strung out on drugs, and probably never had money for gas. So it was a rarity for cars to pass this late at night, especially. Which was good for us. We made it past the small abandoned town part of where we lived. Every single store was abandoned. After walking over an hour, we were in the most desolate part of the country area. So desolate that you couldn't even see a single house. The only light was from the moon. About a half mile down the road, we saw a car heading towards us. With no idea what to think or do, we didn't do anything. I guess our apathy got to us. I mean, there wasn't much we could do anyways. Luckily, this night we weren't too messed up on anything. As it got closer, we realized it was a van. The person driving was a mid-60-year-old man with long white hair. He stopped and asked where we were headed, and we told him nowhere. He asked if we wanted a ride to nowhere, to which I said no thanks. But Caden said yes, please, and I was like, dude, WTF, no. But I wasn't going to be stranded out there by myself, nor did I want Caden to go alone with this creepy man. So we hopped in the car, and Caden requested to take us home. I didn't know why. We were perfectly capable of walking home ourselves like usual, and I was having fun. And that's when the man let out a creepy laugh along with a condescending grin. Us three boys are going to have tons of fun tonight, he whispered. And that's when he took out a Bowie knife and said we had to do what he said or we were dead meat. Caden and I looked at each other with the same wide-eyed fear. We knew what we had to do. Caden took the wheel as I began beating the man's face in with a boot that was in the back seat. We swerved off the road and almost flipped over. The creep was knocked out cold, hopefully dead, but Caden and I managed to get out unscathed. I mean, we had scratches and bruises and stuff, but nothing fatal. We jumped out of the van and started running home. With a good hour to walk home, we talked about that guy the whole way. We were worried that he was going to come to before we could get out of his sight, and that he would chase us down and try to run us over maybe. But that never happened. About 5 minutes into running, it started pouring down rain. It was a long and cold night. With no way to call for help, we walked all the way home and never spoke much about it again after this. It's a good thing we weren't intoxicated that night. That would have made everything much worse. maybe I wouldn't even be here to write this story. The night was young and I was just leaving work at 7 p.m. on a Saturday night. I worked at a bowling alley part-time while I was pregnant to help my husband with the bills. Admittedly, it was not in a safe area, and my husband didn't really like the idea of me working there, but I had to take what I could get. We were directly in the heart of a small southern God-fearing town in Georgia. This town has its faults though. My husband Darren wasn't going to be home for at least 3 hours. He worked at least 60 hours most weeks, so he was having some dude time at the local bar with his buddies, probably watching football. That was fine with me, because I was originally supposed to hang out with my girls after work, but I wasn't feeling the best, so I decided to ditch that idea. So now I was going straight home. I want to touch briefly on the fact that as soon as I was waiting to make the left-hand turn onto Jefferson Road leaving work, I saw a car's lights turn on right behind me in the back of the parking lot, probably 35 feet away. I took note of it, but that was about it. I took my turn and I was headed back home. About a 12-minute drive. About 2 miles down the road, I had to stop at a stoplight, and that car rolled right behind me. I recognized it from the headlights. Okay, coincidence, I thought, but every single turn I made after this, they made as well. Looking back and counting, it would have made out to be 6 turns. I had 1 turn left to go and about a quarter mile down the dirt road before I were to be home. At this point, I knew I was being followed, so I called my husband and he said he would rush home. He was 15 minutes away though. And thinking back, I should have called the police and drove to the station right then and there, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Instead, I pulled right into my driveway. We have a decent sized driveway, so I pulled up right next to the garage and I ran inside as fast as possible. And just enough time for me to lock the door before the man got out and tried the handle. I ran downstairs and grabbed one of Darren's guns, and I grabbed my mace from our room. I called Darren again and I told him that the man was trying to break in. The creepy man started screaming and pounding on every door around the house to try and get inside. I was standing in the living room when suddenly our bedroom window shattered. At this exact moment, I had never been more terrified. I was still on the phone with my husband, and he told me to get back in the car and drive to the police station, and that he would meet me there. I had to hang up to call the police as well. Luckily, I had way more than enough time to get in the car safely, as the living room was closer to the outside garage door than our bedroom was, and he had to climb through the window to get in. I ran outside to get in my car, and as I was unlocking it, there he was, standing right under the doorway of the garage. He paused for a second, and I thankfully locked the car door in time before he grabbed the handle. And that was when I recognized him. I didn't even look behind me, I just floored it in reverse. I was so pissed off. I rammed into his car and I put it in drive and almost hit him in the process. I pulled out onto the dirt road and sped up to 90 miles per hour to the station. The idiot actually followed me all the way to the station, and he ended up getting arrested after I told the police what happened. As soon as I pulled into the parking lot, 2 officers getting in their patrol vehicles noticed I was distressed, and they knew it was me from the call. Immediately they flagged the man down and yanked him out of his vehicle. He was arrested, and about 5 minutes later my husband showed up. The man following me was this one dude that always came in to harass the younger girls or women. We've had problems with him in the past, and he was trespassed from the property, but that didn't stop him from trying. When he first started coming around, he was annoying and always way too drunk, but it became a real problem when he would flirt with every girl in there, even the minors. He was bad. He would say stuff like he wanted to get the girls pregnant, and he seemingly enjoyed making us uncomfortable. I don't even understand what makes people do stuff like this. The small town I lived in was more than enough growing up to keep me happy, and I wouldn't change a thing about my friends or my childhood. My best friend and I lived in a small neighborhood right next to Main Street downtown. We would skateboard around the area almost every day of the summer. Sometimes we would get ice cream or simply just enjoy each other's company. Everyone knew everyone here, and that's why when this happened, it made headlines. I will never forget this man. There was a man who went by the name Danny, and we later found out that wasn't even his real name. Danny worked on Main Street in a small vacuum store that he owned. He had no employees and he was there almost every day from open to close. I don't know why we did this. I guess we were weird kids, but sometimes we would walk in his small store randomly and talk to him. He seemed like a nice guy, but something seemed off about him. Being an arrogant teen, we barely read into that and probably didn't even care when he would get annoyed of us. Most of the time he would talk to us and put up with our shenanigans. Sometimes I could tell when he was annoyed and didn't want our company. It became a ritual to stop in there every once in a while for us. A couple of years go by and we found out why he put up with us all those times. It was because he was grooming us or something like that. He had a thing for kids. One day he made some flirtatious comments to my friend and I that were way too far. We instantly thought he was a creep and we were about to leave when he asked us to stay. It was like his whole demeanor had changed. We had never seen him act this way. All of a sudden, he was being super nice and all apologetic. Screw that though, he was a weirdo, so we left. We talked about him the whole walk home. We never went back to that store and we did everything in our power to stay as far away from him as possible. Now about a year later, my grandpa was reading in the paper. It made headlines in our town. Everybody knew him and they were surprised, but not me and my friend. The paper said Mr. Jones lured 2 young boys in his car from a park and almost got away with kidnapping them. But someone saw it happen and thought something was wrong, so they called the police and got his license plate. The police were sent to his house and they forced entry, and they found the boys locked in a room where he had planned to do God knows what. The boys were twin brothers and only like 11 years old. They reported that he hadn't hurt them in any way, but Mr. Jones did, however, tell the boys what he was planning on doing to them. He told them he had a fantasy of killing kids and doing whatever he wanted to them afterwards. He is currently in prison and is serving a lengthy sentence. Hopefully he gets the death penalty, or at least rots in there until he's dead. Whatever it is, he doesn't belong in society.